Oh, so be in the category of remind me, so I don't forget. So I have $5 here that I promised to Lily, and now she's blushing. So in front of everybody, I promise you this today. I'm carrying it for you. So, how long ago was that? Was like no, not right now. Later, no, at the end. Yeah. We don't want people to think that's what we do on Sunday mornings is exchange money. But I promise this to Lily, and you're all witnesses. I'm giving it to her. A promise is a promise. What was that for? Was that because you laughed? Okay, that's what it was. Something like that. She's my paid cheerleader group all by herself. Okay, we have oxen on the screen today, starting our query of the morning, and that thing on their shoulders is called a... Are you joking? Yoke. Oh, yoke. Yoke. Yes, a yoke. Yeah, that's a yoke. So a yoke, for those of us who don't have oxen in our backyard and putting yokes on them every day, so we don't have the experience to be able to draw from, the yoke does what? What does it accomplish? Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of the right stuff. So you guys know what you're talking about, so I don't have to school you on it. So yeah, keeps them together, but it actually couples their power into doing work in the ground, because see that chain right there? Oops, I don't see the chain right there. See that chain right there? Yeah, so that's usually coupled to a plow or something like that. So you take the power of 2 oxen and it makes them take the power of their bodies and actually do some work with a plow. Also, when we talk about marriages, we talk about you don't want to be unequally yoked, because marriage is like this. No, marriage is not like this. No. Erase that. I expected a lot more snide comments on that one. Okay. Well, in the kinder sense, it means that you're not going to pull in one direction if one of the oxen is more powerful than the other. So you have to make sure that when you get married, you're pulling in the same direction. I'm still not pulling it out. Okay, why are we talking about this? We're in Galatians, and we're going to do a little recap as we get into Galatians right here, because we're at a pivot point in Galatians, which is not just the pivot point of the book. So, as we look at the book, we want to make sure we're accurate on it. But this is the fulcrum of the entire Bible right here. And you'll see this in a second. This is like super important. It's so important that when you have the Old Testament and the New Testament, the word testament is just a Latin version of covenant, the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. So what we're talking about here today is the New Covenant. It's why we actually name the New Testament the New Testament. It's pivotal. It's the center. It's everything. And it's so radical. It's so radical that when Paul had his Damascus Road experience with Jesus and Jesus rebukes him, it takes Paul about a decade or more to get his head straight about trying to figure out how does the New Covenant and the Old Covenant mesh. And this, in the book of Galatians and all of Romans, is him saying this is how it meshes. So what you're going to see today and have been seeing for the last couple of weeks is something that I bet you 99 out of 100 Christians don't get. It's a gigantic deal. And what is the deal? We do not earn God's respect by what we do. We cannot earn our salvation. And it's something that the Jews had kind of started doing around the time of Paul, because they said, well, the Old Testament, God says, do these things. If you do these things, God will accept you. Yes, but no. And this is the conflict that Paul worked with, and this is what he's explaining in Galatians. So let me do a recap, because this is important. Chapter 3, verse 14 is it. So that in the Messiah Jesus, the blessing of Abraham, and now when Abraham is the father of the Jews, right? Father of the Jews, the blessing of Abraham should come to the Jews only, right? No, because what he's saying is because of what Jesus has done, it comes to the Gentiles as well. That's new covenant. That's new covenant. The promise is not just to the Jews. The promise is extended to Gentiles, to all mankind, okay? So it might come to the Gentiles so that we might receive the promised Spirit through faith. Capital F, faith, not through working the law. So at the time of Jesus, there had been kind of a partial blindness on the nation of Israel. They thought God was happy with them based on what they accomplished in the law. And when you read the Old Testament, that kind of makes sense. And it actually is true, but it got sort of perverted. What they thought was, in order to remain as God's people and to be in his favor and to be justified in God's eyes, they had to continue to work the law, And the more they succeeded working the law, the more God was satisfied with them. The more they failed, the more God was dissatisfied with them. Okay, so that was the idea, and that was what was kind of messing up things, because when Christians started coming to the Jewish Messiah, Jesus, and he is the Jewish Messiah, he's promised in the Old Testament. When they started coming to Jesus, it was a natural reflex for the Jews to say, well, if they're coming to the Jewish Messiah, then they have to become Jews. And if you become a Jew, you become a Jew how? Circumcision. And more, and the kosher food laws and all that kind of stuff. So this was a debate that was raging in the middle of the book of Acts. Raging. And it kind of comes to a peak in chapter 15 in Acts, where they finally get this big convention together in Jerusalem of the new Christian community, and they say, we got to settle this. Do the Gentiles have to become Jews if they want to be a follower of Jesus? You can read it in Acts 15. They duked it out. And they finally said, no. In fact, if you're not familiar with Acts 15, take a look at it, because at the end of the Acts 15, they say, okay, this is what we have to put on the Gentile believers in Jesus. Just these things. So it lists it in Acts 15, and they say, write it down, and it lists it again when it writes it down, Acts 15. And you'll be surprised how few things are on that list. And the kosher food laws are not. And circumcision is not. So this is what we're coming to. What Paul is saying is that because we come to God through Jesus by faith, that allows the Gentiles to be there. But what he's also making a point for was, this was always the plan for the Jews as well. Faith. And why? Because the father of the nation of the Jews, Abraham, found his justification with God through faith. So if you're a son of Abraham, if you're part of the God's family in that sense, you're there not because of ancestry, but because of faith. Everyone, always, even the Jews. So that's the point he's making right here. That's what took him so long to unwind. So we're still looking at background stuff. This blessing of Abraham is coming to the Gentiles. The promised Spirit, God's Spirit comes to us, and it's all through faith. Same for Gentiles, same for Jews, same for anybody. Everybody is in the same bucket. That's what he's saying. And Jews do not have an inherent advantage over the Gentiles when it comes to salvation. Whoa, yeah. By the way, this phrase, blessing of Abraham, the blessing of Abraham, is a euphemism for what we normally call salvation. And I'll show this in a second, because there's a lot of ways of saying that. But this blessing of Abraham is actually salvation, what you and I would call salvation. So stick that in your pocket for a second. Okay, and we looked at this in Romans 4. Romans is like an expanded version of Galatians. And see what Paul says here in a more expanded way. This is still summary. Romans 4:13. The promise to Abraham, by the way, promise to Abraham in our sense is salvation. The promise to Abraham and his offspring that he would be heir of the world did not come through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. And why didn't it come through the law? Because during the time of Abraham, the law didn't exist. And that's the point he's going to make today. It just makes a lot of sense. We go all the way back to this verse right here, which is the foundation of all of this. Abram, by the way, is Abram before he's Abraham. Abraham is an extension that he'd be a blessing to the nations. Why? That's what the Ham part is, an extension to the nations. But anyway, he believed the Lord, and it was counted to him as righteousness. Well, what did he believe? What did he believe? Well, if you go to the verse before that, it turns out that Abram is standing outside. God takes him outside, and he's talking to God, and he's having this conversation. God, you said a great nation would come out of me, but you know what? I don't have any descendants. I don't have any children. How does this work? And it's been quite a long time after the promise and having no kids. So at this particular point in the discussion with God, Abram says, look, here's the deal. I do have a servant in my house, and he's as much a family member as anyone else is. I guess this whole nation of offspring is going to come from him. And God says, no, I said it'd come from you. From your family. Isaac's not born yet. So this is the discussion that Abram's having with God. So God takes him by the hand, takes him out under the stars, and he says, look at the stars, Abram, look at the stars. And he asks Abram this, look toward heaven, number the stars, if you're able to number them. So shall your offspring be. And then verse 6, and he believed. Now, why was that so persuasive? Because God promised that he would have a nation of offspring that would be so numerous you couldn't count them. So he goes and he takes Abram out to the sky. He says, look, stars, I made those. You can't number those. If I made those, why are you doubting that I cannot create a nation out of you? And Abram goes, oh, ding. But I want to focus on this believed word, because this is understood, and we need to pin this down before we get to new scriptures today. We still haven't gotten to the new Galatian part today. This word believed is this word amen. And amen, there it is in Hebrew for you Hebrew scholars. And amen means a lot of things all together. Established is probably the best translation of it, which means something that's, it's true. I know it's true. It's established. You can't move it. So the ideas of established, it's sure, it's confirmed, it's firm, it's I believe it, and then it's used as a pillar or a nurse. Nurse? Because the idea is that when you have a nurse assigned to your care and you're not doing well, you can be assured that things will be fine. So that sense of assurance, that sense of establishment, as opposed to, I'm sick and I'm going to die, will anybody help me? Oh, you've got a nurse. Oh, and pillars, because pillars held up roofs, right? When was the last time you went into a room and you wondered whether or not the roof was going to hold up? You're right here, okay. So a pillar is something that's established, it's confirmed, it's reliable, it's trustworthy. Okay, so you get all those ideas kind of in your head. That's what we're talking about. And it ends up in trust. So this idea of belief is one that gets misunderstood often, because I tell people, the crux, the issue from the New Covenant, from the New Testament perspective, is believing in Christ. And people say, well, I believe there's Christ. I believe he walked in here. Well, that's not quite enough. But that's just a confirmation in your own mind that a historical person existed. But that's not really enough. What we're talking about is he established as being the Son of God? Is he established as something who he claimed to be that's much bigger than just a historical figure? And as a result of that, do you place your trust in him just like you place your trust in a column not to let the roof fall down on you? Or do you trust him? Is he established? Is he confirmed? Is he real? And are you willing to put your trust in him from this point forward? It's that whole bailiwick. So when we talk about belief, very, very similar to the word faith. In fact, in the New Testament, the Greek word is often exactly the same Greek word. So the process in your head goes like this, is you come to be persuaded by the truthfulness of something. That's the belief part. You're persuaded that this is true. And since that's persuaded is true, then you ask yourself, so now what do I do based on that fact that I have embraced? Well, now I trust in a way that makes sense with that. So if Jesus is the Son of God and the things he claimed in the New Testament, we need to take seriously what he said. Do you take seriously what Jesus says in the New Testament? Are you willing to say he's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords? He came a first time, he's coming a second time, kingdoms, all that whole package. Do you believe all that stuff and then commit yourself into that? So belief is believing that, that's established. Faith is acting on that and changing the course of your life as a result. So the two go together hand in hand. That's belief. So when Abram stood in front of the stars and God said, count the stars, he suddenly went from doubting whether God could create a nation of descendants from him to saying, I'm convinced it's true. Why? Because God made stars. He can make children from me. So that's what happened there. Okay. Whew. New passage. So we're in chapter 3, verse 15. And he says, let me give you a human example, brothers. Let me give you a human example. Paul is going to give us the same information with the advantage of a human example. So let me give you a human example, brothers. Even with a man-made covenant, no one annuls it or adds to it once it's been ratified. Right? I mean, when you make a deal, and the deal is set. That's the way it goes. So like, for instance, for instance, if I said to Lily, I know I promised you this, but I have some questions that you need to answer for me before you to qualify to get this to you. And then you would all say, foul, that's wrong. You promised it. All right, that's a covenant. You promised it. I saw you in front of all these people. You committed your promise. You promised. You can't now add conditions to that promise, right? Right. That's what Paul's saying. He's saying somehow when you go back to the Old Testament, sorry, Lily, she's feeling embarrassed. Somehow when you go back to the Old Covenant thinking what you need to do is you need to earn something that God has given to you as a promise. That's an abomination. See? That's an abomination. So that's what Paul is saying. So here's the example. And he gets much more critical here. Now the promises were made to Abraham and to his offspring. The word literally is seed, and that'll come back to us in a second. The promises were made to Abraham and to his offspring. And it doesn't say and to offsprings, that is the plural, meaning, for many, referring to many. But he says referring to one, and to your offspring, to a seed. And then he explains himself. Who is the Messiah, Jesus? So what he's saying, the example is that the promise goes to Abraham and to Jesus, not all the genetic offspring of Abraham from that point. This promise of a nation coming out of him that'll be part of God's family, God's kingdom, all that stuff. Abram and Jesus, and then through Jesus, the nation comes. And then he gets to this kind of contract issue, because that'll come to be with this. So this is what I mean in all this. The law which came 430 years afterward does not annul a covenant previously ratified by God so as to make the promise void. He's talking very legalistic here. What he's saying is a promise was made to Abraham, and then Moses came after, and that's when the law comes. The law and the restrictions of doing behavioral things in the law has nothing to do with the promise that happened centuries before with Abram. And so he spells it out. Here's my pictures of these guys. I keep them in my computer. So with Abram, you have this guy where the promise came from God to Abram, and it was an eternal promise. It goes forward. And then 430 years later, you have Moses coming, who leads them out of Egypt and into the promised land to establish them as God's people. And the law is given because God says, look, if you're going to be my people, this is how you behave in order to reflect who I am in the world. So what Paul's saying right here is the promise inactive? I mean, the promise, then, and when we see covenant, think promise. They're really tightly coupled together, but the covenant is a more sure idea of the promise. So if the covenant was actually given to Abram and goes on eternally, even past the time of Moses and the nation of Israel, why would you think that the law annuls that? Did the law step on the promise and make it ineffective? Because what you're doing by going back and saying, God will respect me if I do the law, is you're saying that the promise has been annulled and you can't participate in it. See what he's saying? So does the law actually get rid of this promise that was given to Abram? Well, no, it doesn't. But what Paul is saying is that what I'm seeing you guys doing when you go back to kosher food laws, the law, and so many other things, you're saying that I'm justified with God by doing those things. When in fact, at the moment of the promise, if you participate in that promise, you're justified with God. You don't have to prove it after that. See, that's what he's saying. And he's doing it in a uniquely Jewish context right here. Okay, then it goes on to verse 18. If the inheritance, which is another buzzword for salvation, okay, in our context, if the inheritance comes by the law, it no longer comes by promise. You catch that? God has made a promise to Abraham, and we can participate in that promise. It'll become more clear in a second when I show you some pictures. We can participate in that promise, and we participate in that promise in the same way Abraham did, by faith, and not by exercising the law. The promise is the promise. We participate by faith in it. The promise is something that's given by God, that's not earned by us. So the law does not annul the promise. So he goes on, for if the inheritance comes by the law, it no longer comes by promise, but God gave it to Abraham by a promise. And if you call yourself a follower of Jesus, a participant in the grace of God and what God's done on your behalf, you are participating in the promise to Abraham. And you're one of the nations of uncountable people of the descendants of Abraham. Really? Yes. Yes, and this is supported all throughout scriptures. The real descendants of Abraham, when God said to Abraham, you're going to have innumerable people as descendants coming out of you, that'll be a nation. What he was talking about is the people who exercise not just genetic conformity, but who actually who put away performing and have said, I participate by faith just like Father Abraham. Then you're part of that gigantic promise that he gave to Abram, that a nation would come out of you. So interestingly enough, you may not have known it today, you might call yourself a Christian, which in Greek means little Christ, by the way. But you'll come out today understanding you're also a son of Abraham, who was right with God through faith, which is the same way you are too. That's what he's saying. Faith has always been the issue about relationship with God. And that's all the new scriptures today that you can handle. What? Okay, we need to chew on this for a little bit. So we're going to chew for a little bit, because what we just went through right there is the essence, it's the foundation of the new covenant. And that's what I think most Christians don't understand, the new covenant. The new covenant is not stressing how you need to behave to be a new Christian, how you need to behave in order to earn God's respect, how you need to do things in order to improve what God thinks of you. That is not new covenant. New covenant is someone who understands that I'm a child of God by faith in what he's done for me in exactly the same way Abraham did. And has nothing to do with my actions. Now, I got to give you a caveat right now, because you might think, well, Jim, you're saying that actions aren't important. No, actions are extraordinarily important. And we're going to have to paint the rest of that picture as we go on in Galatians. They're extraordinarily important. I mean, it's still important that you don't go out and shoot a neighbor who happens to be playing the music too loud at night. That's very important. So don't think, well, we don't have to worry about what we do anymore because I'm a beneficiary of the promise, and so I'm in. So bang, you're an annoyance. You don't do that. We don't do that. Or a whole host of things. No, our behavior is extremely important. In fact, the law, which is a statement of righteous behavior, is still extremely important. And Jesus underscored that when he says, I didn't come to get rid of the law. I came to fulfill it. So you're probably confused saying, okay, but help me out here. If it's not about what I do that impresses God, then why do I have to do the law? And we'll have to tease that as it goes on, because this should raise the same questions that caused Paul to sit in a room for over a decade trying to figure this out. How does this work then? The law is important, behavior is important, but here's the deal, and this is where the rubber meets the road. Your ability to earn God's respect by doing the law doesn't work. You cannot work the law and God say, well, you look like a pretty good person, you can come to heaven. No, that does not work at all. That's actually an extraordinarily clever satanic twist in all that. You have justification with God. You're made right with God by what God has done in the promise he's extended to you, which you received. That's it. It has nothing to do with what you do. After that point, your behaviors are important, but they have absolutely no impact on your relationship with God in terms of whether you're part of his family. You're in. I was just talking to David this morning about adoption. And I won't tell your story. Ask David about his adoption story. It's fascinating. But the deal is, at adoption, if you're the adopted child, you're adopted, and that's just done. It's not a conditional adoption. The adoption isn't, well, you can be part of my family, you can be part of my protection, and be part of my provision, and be part of everything that I do to provide for you can be part of all that kind of stuff. But you know what? One of these days, if you cross this line, you're out. I'm just adopting you. Well, we don't do that. You adopt, and it's there, and it's done. Now, your behavior can make your parents happy or sad. And there's other reasons why your behavior is important, but has nothing to do with you being adopted. That's what's important here. In the same way, your actions have nothing to do with God's favor towards you and inviting you into his family and you accepting it through faith. So at that point, nothing you do impresses God. Enough for him to accept you in his family. He's already brought you in his family. That's done. And so the big, great good news in the new covenant is we can take a big sigh of relief. I don't have to spend the rest of my life trying to toe the line carefully enough that God says, cross the line, no salvation for you. No. I'm not giving you another $5 for that. You see what I'm saying? So the law is important, behavior is important, but it has no bearing whatsoever in impressing God so much that you'll actually be justified with him. You're justified with him on the basis of what Christ has done, not what you've done. That's the distinction. That's super important. That's the new covenant. Well, let's look at a couple things. This is my summary of that very important thing. The blessing of Abraham, aka salvation, the blessing of Abraham has come to the Gentiles in the Messiah Jesus. In Jesus, that's possible. He's the one that's made it possible for us. So let me just throw some stuff together. So here's one of my most complex graphics I'll give you in a long time. This is a timeline of God's intention, good intention for mankind. Back at the time of Abram, it's kind of called the promise. And this is a fulfilled relationship with God that Abram has because he believed God. Promise, or in other places it's called the blessing. It's kind of this continued goodness that God has for his intentions with mankind. And it started in our list here with Abram, the promise, the blessing. Or if you go all the way to the end of Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, and he deals with this topic a ton. He doesn't call it the Old Covenant or the New Covenant, the Old Testament or the New Testament. He calls it the Eternal Covenant. So this has been God's intent to do good with mankind from the very beginning, and we use Abram as our start to say we participate in God's good intentions for us, not based on our accomplishments, but based on what he's done in Christ for us, and we participate through faith. We believe and we have faith. So this is God's good intentions for mankind ever since the fall. He wants to have this restored relationship with mankind, but it's on us to believe. It's on us to have faith, and after that, the entire process of how we can have a relationship with God and be in his family, be adopted in his family, is what he's done. What he's done. It's his works, not our works. So here's a couple of passages and a couple of guys again. So there's Abram way back there under the promise. He's way back, old-time guy, and all the Jews look back to him, and we ought to as well, because he's the prototype for someone who finds relationship with a loving, merciful God through believing what God says and then participating in faith and trusting. That's Abram. That's the guy who did that. He's the prototype for that. But then 430 years later, so he participates through belief and faith. Big deal, to participate in God's good intentions for mankind. So here comes Moses and all the Jews after that, after they come out of Israel, out of Egypt and into Israel, 400 plus years after the enslavement down there. And they establish a new nation, and God says to Moses, bring them out, and by the way, give them these laws. I want them to behave like my family. And his promise to them was, here's God's intention. This is the yellow line. God's intention, stated literally from the Old Testament, is, I will be your God, and you will be my people. There's a mutual kind of connection. God, the God and creator of the universe, I will be your God, you will be my people. That's the Old Testament statement of salvation. And it's literal. It says it over and over again. I will be your God. You will be. In fact, in Leviticus, he adds to that a little bit, where God says in Leviticus, and Leviticus, by the way, is the book of the law. In Leviticus, he says, I will walk among them, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. It's this mutual, devoted relationship between God, the Creator, and the nation of Israel, or between God the Creator and us, his creations as well. I will be your God, you will be my people. And so that people mention he has right there is the innumerable descendants of Abram, the man of faith. That's how that goes. I will be your God, you will be my people. There's another place, I think it's in Kings, I think it's when Solomon's talking, I should have looked this up. But he says basically the same thing. I'll be your God, you'll be my people. But then he precedes that by not I'll walk with them, but he says, and I will dwell with them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. That's the statement of salvation. So if salvation for you is defined more like, well, I would rather avoid the fires of hell, and I prefer the streets of gold, so that's why I'm saved, and I said yes to God. No, actually, salvation is primarily a relational statement on your part with God, the Creator, saying, I want you to be my God, and I will be your people. Which means adoption. It means child. It means part of his kingdom. And it's something he's promised, starting with Abram. It's a promise, if we will accept it. And like Abram, do we believe? And as a result, do we enact through faith a changing course to follow him? So it's really putting our hands in the hands of God himself. That's what that's all about. That's what salvation. Salvation isn't just avoiding judgment in the fires of hell. Salvation is all about a renewed relationship with the God creator. That's what it's all about. I will be your God, you'll be my people. That's what the yellow line is. Now, did the Jews participate in that? Because those passages just quoted came from the Jewish Old Testament. Well, it's kind of, if you know the history of the Jews, it's a checkered past. That's a kind way of saying it. It's a checkered past. They are the people that God chose to represent him on earth in order to be a light to the Gentiles, in order to bring them to God himself. But it was a checkered past. So checkered, in fact, that they failed God. They failed following God so much and had excluded him from their worship and from their hearts, that he says, well, if you're really hankering for another God, I can give you the Assyrians. And he takes the northern kingdom away in captivity. And he says, have at it. The gods of the Assyrians, here you go. And he takes them away captive. 7 centuries before Jesus. And then the southern kingdom, who are, there's a remnant still remaining in Judah, think, well, boy, I hope that never happens to us. And 150 years later, they've lost their heart for God. I mean, in terms of the statement, I'll be your God, you'll be my people. They lost their heart for God. And God says, well, bye. And he kicks them out of his house, the promised land. And they go to the Babylonians. Now, there's been a restoration after that, but their relationship with God hasn't changed. But God basically said, look, if you don't want me, we can have a temporary, separation, and just tell me how that works out. And we read this a while ago in Ezra and Nehemiah. When they actually come back to the land after the Babylonian captivity, there's just a remarkable heart change toward God at Ezra and Nehemiah. Remarkable. I mean, it's remarkable. It's so encouraging. So if you've never read Ezra and Nehemiah, you need to read it because it's such an encouraging passage about how God can change the hearts of his people who are even in, remote captivity, who were there because they disregarded God. And they said, we won't do that anymore. And their hearts changed. That's a remarkable story. It's a remarkable story. So how'd they do on the faith and belief thing? Checkered. Because they were sort of misled by the fact that once the law came, our chance of salvation with God is working the law. And that was a wrong conclusion. The behavior is important. The people of God need to reflect who God is by their behavior. But earning God's respect and his justification by what they do, no, that's not it. So they got kind of detoured by that. And so by the time you get to the first century with Jesus, Jesus takes them to task for that all the time. You guys have been detoured by the law. Now, I didn't come to get rid of the law. He has to say this over and over. But you guys are using the law in the wrong way. You're using the law, like we talked about last week, as a tool to try and enact God's favor for you. And that's wrong. That's wrong. But aren't we supposed to do it? Well, yes, and we'll talk about that. But in terms of earning God's favor, no. So let me skip past that. So we talked about Abram's seed, which is Jesus himself, who comes so many years later. Abram and his seed. The promise of that yellow line comes through Abram, faith, belief, and now through Jesus as well. Abram's seed. And so what happens is that the Gentiles can find opportunity to take part in this great intention of God. I will be your God, you will be my people, through what Christ has done. In Christ, Paul is saying, the Gentiles have an opportunity to participate in this promise. The promise that was extended to Abram, Paul says, actually comes to us today through what Christ has done for us. That's what's fascinating about it. So we can also, in the same way as Abram, through belief and faith, we believe, we have faith, we participate in the promise of blessing, which is the same as came from Abram to us. And that's how we participate. In the same way Abram did. Faith and belief. That's how we do it. Now, in the case of Jesus, the belief, belief is actually being persuaded about a fact. And during the time of the First Testament, what was that fact that people needed to believe? Well, it's very clear they needed to believe that Jesus was the Son of God. Not just some preacher, not just some nice guy who said clever things. They needed to believe that he himself was equal with God in stature and authority and worthy of worship. I mean, all of that. That's a boatload of things to believe about Jesus, who showed up in the first century, the son of a carpenter from the backwoods of Nazareth, and you're saying that this guy is the Son of God? That was the challenge. That's why how often Jesus would walk around saying, well, so Who do you say that I am? Because that's what his issue. A son of a carpenter? No. And at one point we were talking about Peter. Peter says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Boom! Gets it. So it's that belief. And if that's true, then the whole course of your life should change in terms of submitting yourself to God and his plans for you. See, it's such a huge fact. You believe it, you embrace it, you enact on it, you trust, and you've done the whole believed faith kind of episodes. So that's how we participate in this. So in a real sense, that's why I say we participate in this good intention of God for salvation and relationship with God. I'll be your God, you'll be my people. And exactly the same basis as Abram did. And exactly the same basis that God expects the Jews to. But when they lost their faith and they lost their belief, God said, you're going to go on a holiday until you figure this out. And those were the captivities. Okay, so let me show you some passages. If you think I'm crazy what I'm saying, are you a son of Abraham because of your faith? Okay, here's a couple things. Then they said to him, Jesus was having a debate in John 6. They said to him, so what must we do to be doing the works of God? Right on target what we're talking about here. What are the works I need to do? And Jesus answered them and said, this is the work of God, that you get circumcised. No. Yeah, you are reading it. That you believe. Is belief that important? Yeah. How do we do the works of God? What are the works of God? Believe. And that'll lead to embracing the fact of who he is. And that'll lead to change the whole course of your life as a result, because it's a big fact. And then we trust and we move forward. I'll be your God. You'll be my people. That's the impact of what that means. Believe. Is that it? Yeah. But again, not just believing that Jesus exists, believing that Jesus is who he is. It's really important. Yeah. Can I read you a passage? This just dawned on me, because it pertains to this belief thing. John 1:1. You know John 1:1, right? Where John decides to start his gospel about who Jesus is by not starting with the birth of Jesus, but he starts at the beginning of the universe. But listen to this. Now keep listening. Keep listening for the belief word. Went too far. Okay, the word became flesh and dwelt amongst us. Okay, we got that. And we've seen his glory as of the only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. And John bore witness of him. For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. And just before that, he precedes it by saying one of the most remarkable things. This true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. This is Jesus, the light coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world didn't know him. In fact, he came to his own. Who's that? The Jews. He came to his own, and his own people didn't receive him. But, and here's the biggest switch in all scriptures, but to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Did you hear it all? Now, it said not just they believed, but they believed in his name. That's an important end of that phrase, in his name. Because name, the easy way to think about in his name, name is a representation of someone's reputation. What are they known for? What are they known for? That's their name. What are they known for? So when he says, so you're given the right to become children of God, if you believe in what he's known for, if you believe in his reputation, if you believe in the fact that he's the Son of God, if you believe in the fact that he's the promised Messiah, all that whole package, if you believe in his name and his reputation, who he is, well, then, has nothing to do with your ancestry to Abraham, because now you're allowed to become a child of God. You're adopted. It's all about belief. It's all about belief. A couple of other passages that give us a little insight on this. So this is Jesus talking to Nicodemus right after he gives us the famous John 3:16, for God so loved the world. Right after that he says this. And he says, verse 17, God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. I'll be your God, you'll be my people. That's the saved part. And there it is again. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe is condemned already because he has not believed in the reputation and the big picture, the name of the only Son of God. It just keeps coming back. Belief, but we're talking about a gigantic belief, a belief in the fact that Jesus is who he said he is. He is indeed the Son of God. It's fascinating right here that Nicodemus is trying to figure out when he sits with Jesus, he's trying to figure out who Jesus is. And you see it as the John 3 passage opens up. He sneaks out in the dark of night so no one will see him. So his fellow very judgmental Pharisees don't see him sneaking time with Jesus. And he goes at night, he goes to Jesus, he sits down, and Nicodemus starts the conversation with, well, we think you're a teacher. It's all about identity. Like, who is this guy? You're having a big impact. So Nicodemus roundaboutly beats around the bush for a while and basically says, we're just trying to figure out who you are. So who are you really? And Jesus comes to the end here just 2 verses later and says, you have to believe who I am. I mean, really who I am, the Son of God. That's the issue. That's the issue. And you have to recognize that. You have to wrestle with that. You have to embrace that. And then once you embrace that and say, yeah, that's true, then you restructure your life based on that because it has huge consequences. Huge consequences. And there's our yoke back. See, you were wondering when our yokes were going to come back. Matthew, Jesus says, now you know this verse, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. I'm gentle and lowly in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So what was the burden that they were being pushed down by? It was this lie that you earn God's favor by working the law. I've got to work. I've got to work. I've got to do better. I've got to be better. I'm not going to make it a judgment. I've got to do more. I got to do more. That's the burden. That's this yoke that it turns out at that time, the Jews who were misunderstanding how the law worked and stuff like that, what it was for, they thought what you got to do is put this yoke on you. And what is the yoke? The yoke is doing the law. Doing the law. And if you don't do it all, you're in big trouble. So you got to work on that. Got to work on that. So the Pharisees made it their entire, professional goal was to understand everything in the Old Testament that pertained to what God wants us to do. Every single commandment, right? Popularly in the modern era, they say there's 613 of those. You look for everything God says to do in the Old Testament, and buddy, you better do them, because if you don't, then when it comes to judgment, you're not going to survive. That was the message of the Pharisees. But that's a twisting of the message. It's a twisting of it. And Jesus comes to them and says, hey, you're under a tremendous yoke. And it's wrong. Because, look, this is the promised Messiah. This is the Son of God, the one they've been waiting for all this time. He says, the yoke that I put on you is not like that. That's a heavy yoke. That's a heavy burden. No. What I do is I come to give you rest. Rest. Rest, by definition, is the cessation of work. You mean like the cessation of working the law? Ding, 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 ding. Yes. Yes. I came to give you rest, not to put more burdens on you. I didn't come down here to finger point at people and say, what are you doing? I'm from heaven, and I'm here to enforce the law, and what are you doing? Stop that. Now, he does do that with the guys at the temple twice, beginning of his ministry, end of his ministry. But that's largely not what Jesus was doing. In that particular case, he was angered by the fact that they had taken a house of prayer and turned it into a place of commerce. That made him mad. But he didn't go around pointing out people's sins all the time. He came to save us from our sins. He didn't draw a line. He didn't weaken what the law said. The woman caught in adultery comes to him. Remarkable scene. And what's the last thing he says to her when she's leaving? Go and sin no more. The law is important. Behavior is important. What's in your heart's important in terms of sin and selfishness. Those things are all very, very important. But Jesus didn't come to condemn the first time. Condemning is what happens at the end of the process in a court of justice. And so we condemn you to 10 years to life in prison, right? Jesus said, I didn't come to bring condemnation. I didn't come to do that. No, I've come to give you rest. Give you rest. And that opens up a whole new idea. If indeed the Christian life is not about performing a list of behaviors to make ourselves incrementally better in God's eyes, if it's not about that, then I'm out from underneath that yoke and I can rest. Behavior is still important. We'll have to get to that later. But in terms of trying to impress God, you can stop impressing God because he adopted you into his family and you're in. It is such good news. And we're saying to ourselves, how is this possible? I am such a dirtbag. I can list for you all the things I'm bad at. And yet God looks at me and says, you want to be part of my family? You go, you're talking to me? And we're all still kind of amazed. Why would he offer this promise to us when we clearly don't qualify? Maybe, wait, God, I like that offer. Give me 20 years and I'll see if I can get my act together. And then, okay, we'll do that. No, he says, no, while we were yet sinning, Christ died for us. So it's not about your performance being perfect. And after you come to salvation, it's not about you making your performance perfect. Or else what we're doing in this series is we're perfecting ourselves to death. The good news is the fact that rest comes in the idea of the new covenant. It's a rest, it's a relieving of a yoke of the burden of the law to perform and to work the law and hence impress God with our righteousness. And Paul, even in some of his other writings, we looked at it last week in Philippians 3, he says, all that stuff I did before Christ, it's all lost, it's all stupid, it's dumb. He says, and he says, and what I had been trying to do was insert my righteousness when God had offered me righteousness through Christ. My righteousness. Can you imagine that? Me trying to make myself more righteous than Christ? Read Philippians 3, because he's so frank and honest with us here 2,000 years later about the fact that he was really following the wrong thing for so long as a professional Pharisee. Rest. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. Hey, there's another yoke passage. Let me set this up for a second. So I told you in Acts 15, there was this huge debate across Christendom at the time about whether or not Gentiles had to become Jews if they're going to follow the Jewish Messiah Jesus. Remember that? So they had this huge debate. They have this big convo down in Jerusalem. And Acts 15 is that convo. That's them getting together and trying to duke out, do we need to have Gentiles become Christian or become Jews? And so here's what happens. And this is where Peter stands up in this, and it's recorded for us in Acts 15. And this is what Peter says about our thinking that we should put the yoke of the law on the Gentiles. And he says, now therefore, Peter speaking, now therefore, why are you putting God to the test by placing a yoke on the neck of the disciples, Gentile disciples, that neither our fathers nor we have been able to bear? Even we as good Jews couldn't bear that yoke. We failed all the time. So why are you contemplating putting that yoke on the new Gentile believers? Huh? Why would you do that? Why would you do that? And it's a yoke that neither our fathers nor we have been able to bear. The law is important. The law is a statement of righteous behavior that reflects the actual heart of God. It is important. But it's not a way to earn God's respect. It's not a way to earn salvation. It's not a way in order to impress God with your self-made righteousness. This is what Paul said in Philippians 3. It's not. It's not. And so in Peter's summary of all this, he says, why would we ever think about putting that kind of burdensome yoke on the Gentile believers when even the Jewish fathers couldn't do it? Wow. This comment has such clarity. And that's at the end of the discussion in this big meeting that they have. And then James, the brother of Jesus, who has kind of a leadership role in the early church in Jerusalem, he stands up and says, well, we're done here. We're done here. And what we need to do, we need to tell the new converts, there's a few things. But they have nothing to do with impressing God. But there's a few things that for other kind of social reasons have good reason. Let's tell them, be mindful of this. But other than that, no, we're not putting the law on them. We're not putting the yoke that even our fathers couldn't do. All that stuff. I mean, about the sacrifices, about the kosher laws, about circumcision, blah, 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 you name it, all that kind of. We're not putting that yoke on them because even our fathers couldn't do it. And Peter's understanding right now that because of what Christ has done, his work frees us from the yoke of that burden. And if you don't feel a certain relief about that, if you've never understood that before, this is a gigantic relief. This is just such a gigantic relief. He's adopted you in his family. You can stop trying to impress him. And here, a writer of Hebrews, oh boy, he talked about rest right there. So then there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. Oh no, are we talking that Saturday, Sunday thing again? No. A Sabbath rest, like a real deep rest. There remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works. You've stopped trying to impress God. Whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. See, the new covenant message is you cannot do enough to impress God with your righteousness. Not going to happen. Yeah, but the law says, I know what the law says, and it's a statement of a standard of behavior that reflects the heart of God. I get that. But you know what? You're not going to be able to do it. Even the fathers, Peter said, couldn't do it. No, what he's offering to you is rest from that performance-based religion. Christianity is not a performance-based religion. Christianity is resting from that performance and settling into the grace of God as he adopts you into his family, which cannot be revoked, can't be changed. And you rest from trying to impress him. You rest from trying to be a somebody when in God's kingdom, he wants you to be in his family if you're a nobody, not a somebody. Whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. This is such a key point, both in all of Paul's writings and Hebrews. We're not sure who wrote Hebrews. But in all of these writings, this is what turned the world upside down, is that God's saying, I want you to be part of my kingdom. I want you to participate in the blessing of Abraham, which is what? Which is, I'll be your God, you'll be my people, and we'll be a family, we'll be a nation, and I'll be in charge, and it'll be wonderful. Do you want to be part of my plans for mankind, or you want to still do what you're doing? I mean, what do you want to do? And we have just such a great reminder in the book of Judges where they really did turn away from God, largely, except for the judges themselves. They turned away from God. And all through the book, I think it's half a dozen times, when you see one train wreck, and you turn the page and there's another train wreck, and there's another train. Judges is just train wrecks of people doing stupid, horrible things. It's horrible. And what it says over half a dozen times, it says, they did what was right in their own eyes. You cannot create your own utopia existence, because when you do what's right in your own eyes, you end up with the book of Judges. Or like we were talking in men's study, you end up with Lord of the Flies. I mean, if you do what's right in your own eyes, you're just not as righteous as you think you are. But God says, I want you to be part of my society, my community, my family. I will be your God, and you will be my people. And that's always been the plan. Will you participate in the fat yellow line that started over Abram's head and went all the way to the future? Do you want to be part of that? Well, okay. Well, then I'll be your God, and you'll be my people. Will you submit to that? Oh, okay. But by the way, I'm really dirty. Yeah, Steve. Yep, that's exactly right. I just read that this morning. And if you don't know the story of Ruth, it's in the book that's named Ruth. Okay. Just so you remember to look at it. Yeah, but it's a fascinating thing because Ruth is a Moabitess. She's actually a daughter-in-law of Naomi, who's left Israel and gone out on the other side of the Dead Sea because there was a famine in the land in Israel. And her sons marry all these foreign women, Midianites and Moabite women. And Ruth is one of those Moabite daughters-in-law that got married. Anyway, the sons all die. The father dies. I mean, all of a sudden you got Naomi and three daughters-in-law. And And Naomi releases them and says, look, you can go back to your own people, Moabite people, largely. You can go back to them if you want. I'm releasing you right now, even though I'm your mother-in-law. You don't have to stay with me. Because after all, my sons, your husbands, are dead. My husband's dead. I'm going back to Israel. That's not your place. That's not your people. So stay here with your people here in Moab. And that's when Ruth says that. She says that. She says, yeah, where you're going, I'm going. Where you lodge, I'm going to lodge. And your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. And then the story of Ruth proceeds after that about what happens. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful. What Ruth did is exactly what we've done in this promise to Abram and promise to the nation of Israel, promise to those who participate with God's good graces based on our faith and our belief. And we said, I want to be part of that people, and I want that God to be my God. I'll be your God, you'll be my people. Even to a Moabite like Ruth, even to an idiot jerk like Jim, yes. I'll be your God, you'll be my people. Grace that's amazing. It's amazing. And we find rest, even now, not at the end of our lives. So one last thing here, going back to this picture. So is there hope for the Jews? I showed them as being kind of hopelessly blocked by this misuse of the law as some kind of tool to earn God's favor. Are they blocked? Well, what's their future? Did they come to God? I mean, are they hopelessly lost? And this is a question that arises in Paul's discussions in Romans, because it makes you wonder. Well, the bottom line is that working the law is a distraction. They need to also come to God and participate in this promise. I'll be your God, you'll be my people, if they do it through faith and belief. And one of the big stumbling blocks from right now, and that's a word that's used in the New Testament, a stumbling block, quoted from the Old Testament, is Jesus himself, because they will not believe who he is. And if they won't believe who he is, they're stuck in trying to gain God's favor through working the law rather than accepting what Christ has done on their behalf. And I'll say this 100 times till I'm blue in the face. The Jews need Jesus just as much as the Gentiles do. And praise God, it turns out there's a lot of Jews today who are coming to Jesus and finding that all along Jesus was not only the Messiah, but he came not to condemn in that first coming, but to save. And so they're coming to Christ. But we got a little time. Let me just do this for you, because this will make a ton of sense to you all of a sudden. A ton of sense. Romans 11 is Paul's answer to, so what about the Jews? Were they bypassed? Did they lose it? Are they stuck? What about God's plan for them? So just listen for a second. So I ask then, has God rejected his people? By no means. I myself, I'm Israelite, a descendant of Abraham, a member of the tribe of Benjamin. God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. Do you not know what the scripture says of Elijah, how he appeals to God against Israel? Oh Lord, they've killed your prophets, they've demolished your altars. I alone am left, and they seek my life. But what is God's reply to him? God says, I've kept for myself 7,000 men who've not bowed the knee to Baal. So too at the present time, there's a remnant chosen by grace. Talking about the Jews. There's a remnant chosen by grace. But if it's by grace, it's no longer on the basis of works. It's no longer on the basis of works. Otherwise, grace would no longer be grace. So what then? What then? Let's get back to the Jews. What then? Israel failed to obtain what it was seeking. The elect obtained it, talking about the Gentiles, but the rest were hardened. As it's written, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that wouldn't see, ears that wouldn't hear, down to this very day. And David says, let their table become a snare and a trap, a stumbling block, a retribution for them. Let their eyes be darkened so that they cannot see, and bend their backs forever. So I ask, did they stumble in order that they might fall? Well, by no means. Rather, through the Jews' trespass, salvation has come to the Gentiles, so as to make Israel jealous. To make Israel jealous. Now, if their trespass means riches for the world, and if their failure means riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their full inclusion eventually mean? They're coming. Now, I'm speaking to you Gentiles. Inasmuch then as I'm an apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry in order somehow to make my fellow Jews jealous. My fellow Jews jealous. And thus save some of them. For if their rejection means the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance mean but life from the dead? If the dough offered as first fruits is holy, well, then the whole lump. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. Speaking of roots, he says, think of Abraham as the root, the branches being the Jews, and then there's us. Think of a big olive tree. But if some of the branches were broken off, we're talking the Jews, if some of the branches were broken off, and you, although a wild olive shoot, that's what you are. You're an uncultured wild olive shoot. If you were grafted in among the others and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree, don't be arrogant towards the branches, the Jews. If you are, remember, it's not you who support the root, but the root that supports you. That's the promise to Abraham. The root supports you. Then you'll say, well, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. Yeah, that's true. That's true. You've been grafted into this promise, Abram. That's true. They were broken off because of their unbelief. Because of their unbelief. But you stand fast through faith. So do not become proud, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, neither will he spare you, you grafted in ones. Note this, he says. Note the kindness and the severity of God. Severity toward those who've fallen, but God's kindness to you, provided you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you too will be cut off. And even they, the Jews, even they, if they do not continue in their unbelief, they will be grafted back in. They'll be grafted back in. For God has the power to graft them in again. Huh? For if you were cut from what is by nature a wild olive tree and grafted, contrary to your nature, into a cultivated olive tree, well, how much more will these, the natural branches, be grafted back themselves into their own olive tree? The Jews grafted back in. Now, lest you be wise in your own sight, I don't want you to be unaware of this mystery, brothers. A partial hardening has come upon the Jews until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And in this way, all Israel will be saved. What? What? All Israel will be saved. As it's written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He'll banish ungodliness from Jacob, and this will be my covenant with them when I take away their sins. Now, as regards the good news, the gospel, what Paul's preaching, as regards this good news, they are enemies for your sake. The Jews are enemies for your sake. But as regards election, they're beloved for the sake of their forefathers. For the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. For just as you were at one time disobedient to God, but now have received mercy because of their disobedience, so they too have now been disobedient, in order that by mercy shown to you, they may also now receive mercy. For God has consigned all to disobedience, that he may have mercy on everybody. Oh, the depth of the riches and the wisdom and the knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments, how inscrutable his ways. For who's known the mind of the Lord? Who has been his counselor? And who has given a gift to him that he might be repaid? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever. Amen. You have found salvation partially because the Jews have fallen. Their branch has been torn off. And you, as a wild, gangly, wild olive branch, have been grafted into the promises that were established at Abram to be Have God as your God and you be his people. You've been included in that in kind of an unnatural way through what Christ has done for us. But what Paul says is don't give up on the Jews. Eventually they'll come to a position where they'll look with jealousy at what God's grace and mercy has done in the Gentile camp. And they'll say, I think I want that. Have we forgotten where we've come from? And there will be a renewal in the Jewish camp. And I put my hopes in that. I remember when I was 16 years old, I was on a bus coming back from a Christian youth retreat, and a gal sat next to me who was a couple years older than me, and I didn't know her very well. And she said, Jim, you understand the Bible. I have a question for you. My boyfriend is very Jewish. He's not a Christian. He's very Jewish. Is there any hope for him in the scriptures? And I said, let's read Romans 11. And so we read Romans 11. She said, oh, so then there is hope. There is. So if you have, well, not just Jewish boyfriends, but if you have Jewish friends or neighbors or relationships, pray for them. Because God is starting to move amongst them and graft them back in from that rebellious state they had where they lost their heart for God. And they swap their heart for God and what he's done for us with their own ability to prove their own righteousness. That's going to flip. Why? Because of the transformation that's going to happen among the Gentile community, that's us, as God's Spirit moves amongst us and as that light comes out and it infects the world and people say, what do they have that I don't have? And that'll have a profound effect on the Jews, according to Paul in Romans 11. Profound effect. We could talk about this all day, and we don't have all day. So let me quit this. We're going to sing this Promises song that Dorothy brought back this morning because, read the words for a second, because this is so Galatians, it's so New Covenant. God of Abraham, God of Abraham, you are the God of covenant, the promises, the faithful promises. Time and time again, you've proven you'll do just what you said. Though the storms may come, the winds may blow, I'll remain steadfast and let my heart learn when you speak a word, it will come to pass. So great is your faithfulness. I will be your God. You will be my people. Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising of the sun to the setting, saying, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. So be mindful of these words as we take a look at this song because it speaks this perfectly. And don't forget, the incredible good news is that you have been saved to be a participant in the plan that started all the way back at Abraham. And what is that plan? God says, I'll be your God and you'll be my people. Do you want to be part of God's nation, the offspring of Abram that God promised to him? You're going to have so many offspring, you're not even going to be able to number them. And he's not talking about just Jews, he's talking about us. Innumerable. It's an incredible thing that has fallen to you and I to be included in this plan. It's an incredible thing. And all because of what Christ has done on our behalf. Salvation is all about participating in the promises to Abraham. I'll be your God. You'll be my people. Yeah. Now, if this is all new to you and you don't know what I'm talking about, in the simplicity of your heart, you can say to God anytime and anywhere, and say, God, I think I want to be part of that plan. I think I want to be part of your goodness that you're showing to mankind, this grace which you show. I don't know how to get there. I don't know how to get where I am, but I'm convinced, I'm persuaded that your heart is toward me and you're inviting me into your family. And all you have to say is, God, I want to be part of that. Show me how to do this. And God responds, because all those who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved. Joel, the prophet. Father in heaven, we thank you for this grand plan. I think we just scratched the surface in our understanding of it. But your persistence throughout the millennia in calling mankind to yourself, in offering the promise of a society, of a nation, of a collection of people, a community that is gathered under one idea. And that idea is that God is our God and he alone is worthy of our worship and our praise. And God is our Father, the kind of human figure as a father that provides and protects and dotes on and calls us the apple of his eye. You're the God that loves us so much that you sent your son to die for us to make this plan work. And this plan has extended to us. And we're still flabbergasted that you see something in us that's so lovable that all this planning that was started at the beginning of the universe, in the Garden of Eden even, has come to fruition, and we are become beneficiaries. That still staggers our hearts. And Father, we want it to stagger our hearts for the rest of eternity, because it not only talks about our fallenness, but the magnitude of your grace to us. It's amazing. So thank you for this promise, and thank you for including us in that promise as well. So thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.